Hello and welcome to Non-Inkables. This is going to be a video on how to play. You do get a quick start guide when you buy a starter deck. It looks like this, and it has the rules inside, but sometimes I think it might be easier just to have someone demonstrate and explain it rather than reading instructions like this. It's a little difficult. There is also a set of complete rules on the Ravensburger website, so if you have any specific questions, that would be a good place to look. I will also briefly mention some terms that TCG players tend to use that I had no idea what they meant, and so we'll get to those as we get there. All right, so to start the game, in Lorcana, you have a deck of cards. You're playing against your opponent, and your goal is to win, obviously. There's two ways to win. You can either get to 20 lore before your opponent, so essentially like 20 points before your opponent, or whoever runs out of cards first loses. So two ways to win. Either you get to 20 lore, which is how most games go, or you force your opponent to draw cards and they run out of cards and then they lose because of that. Within your deck, there's 5 different types of cards. You can have some of them or all of them. You don't have to have all the types, and we will go through what those different types are later. And each step kind of has, each time you have a turn, there's different steps you have to go through, which we will also go through. But first, you have to decide who goes first. So you can decide by rolling a dice. You can decide by flipping a coin, playing rock, paper, scissors, doesn't matter. But you have to decide who's going first before you start. You have to have a way to track your lore, and you have to have a deck that is legal. And then once you have that, you can start. I was going to use a starter deck to film this, but then I thought, why not just use my current deck? So this is my current deck. So I'm going to go over how to organize your play area. So in general, most people have their deck in the top right corner. They'll put all their discard cards here. So when the characters get banished, or if they use an action, they go here and they go face up. And then you hold your hand in your hand, obviously. And then as you choose to ink cards, let's say I choose to ink this card. It goes face down, and anytime you use anything in Lorcana, you just turn it to the side. They will call that exerting the card. They will also call it tapping. So let's say it's my turn, I go first. So the first turn you don't draw a card. Every other turn at the beginning of the turn you would draw a card. So the first turn you choose a card and you say, I'm gonna ink, I'm gonna ink this card, Merlin Crab. So you have to tell your opponent what you're inking, and you flip it over. And then you say, I'm gonna play Olaf for 1 ink. So I turn it to the side to say I've used it. This becomes more important when you have more ink, and then you need to keep track of how much you've inked. And then when you first play a character, it is wet. So the ink is not dry. So you can't do anything with the character this first turn. The only exception to that is if the character has rush. None of these current cards have it, but it'll say in here, rush. This character can challenge another character on their first turn. And so when you're done, you say pass and your opponent goes. Once your opponent goes and they're done with their turn, they say pass, and it's your turn again. You set your ink back to upright, so not used. You get to draw a card. So some people say draw for turn. And then you have to make a decision. And then you can ink 1 card per turn, so you can choose to ink another card. So let's say I want to ink this Olaf. You say, I'm going to ink this Olaf. Now you have 2 ink in your inkwell. And then you can play anything that's 2 cost or less. So let's say I want to play Teeth and Ambition. So it is a song, so technically I could have someone sing it, but Olaf is only 1, so he can't sing a 2 ink song. And then, so I'm just going to play it with ink. And I say I'm going to play Teeth and Ambitions for 2 ink. I use both of my ink, and then Teeth and Ambitions does 2 damage. So you would get 2 damage on your character and 2 damage on the opposing character. So you can mark that with either damage counters, with marbles, with a dice that says 2. It doesn't really matter. And then, now that I'm done using this card, it goes into my discard, which is right below my deck. And then I say, and then so now Olaf, he hasn't technically done anything yet. I mean, he did get damage, but that was from the song. He can choose to quest, or he can choose to challenge another character. So if he were going to quest, I would turn him to the side because I'm using him, and he quests for 1. So then my lore counter, which should be set at 0, would go to 1. So I would have 1 lore. If he wants to challenge another character, you can say, I'm going to challenge one of your other characters, and you would also turn him to the side. And then you would decide, based on his strength and the character you're challenging, whether or not he survives the challenge or if he is banished. You can only challenge your opponent's character if their character is also sideways. So if they have a bunch of characters that are all upright, you cannot challenge them. So then, let's say your opponent goes, and then they don't banish your Olaf somehow survives. Next turn, it is your turn again, so you get to draw a card. And then you reset Olaf to being ready. And you reset your ink to being ready. Let's see. So let's say your opponent goes, they don't actually interact with your cards at all, and it is your, let's say your opponent goes and they don't interact with your cards at all. So it is your turn again. So the first thing you do is reset everything. So you turn everything back to upright. If you have a location, make sure you get that lore. Sometimes some cards have abilities that activate at the beginning of a turn, like draw an extra card. Make sure you do all those things. And then you get to draw a card. And now you get to decide, what do I want to ink? So let's say I want to ink this card, the goat. And you say, I'm going to ink a goat. You show your opponent, you put it in your inkwell. And then you can choose how to spend this ink how you want it. So you could say, I'm going to play this Maleficent, and I'm going to spend 3 ink to pay for that. So you turn your ink to the side, aka exerting it, aka tapping it, and then you play your Maleficent. And so this Maleficent has a special ability. When you play her, you can draw an extra card. So you can just say, I'm drawing an extra card for Maleficent. And then she is still wet, so she can't do anything this turn. You can't quest, you can't sing with her. She's not ready. She's still wet. And so Olaf is dry. So you can choose with him if you want to challenge somebody, if you want him to sing a song, although there are very few one-cost songs, or you can choose if you want to quest with him. Whatever you choose, if you choose to do something with him, he has to turn to the side. So if he sings, if he quests, if he challenges, he has to turn to the side. If you can also always choose not to do anything with him, and he can stay like this, and then that protects him from being attacked by your opponent. So you just go back and forth like that every turn. Make sure you get ready, turn everyone back to ready, draw a card, decide what you want to ink, what you want to do with your characters, and then you pass. So you keep going back and forth like that until somebody reaches 20 or someone runs out of cards. All right, so I've tried to fill this section several times. Hopefully this will be the last time and my doesn't win out. Okay, so we're gonna go through each step kind of more in detail. So this is starting off after you've decided who is gonna go first. So you need to have a deck. So in Lorcana, there are 6 ink colors. They are amber, which is yellow, amethyst, purple, emerald, green, ruby, red, sapphire blue, and steel gray. In your deck, you can have a maximum of 2 colors and a minimum, and then obviously at least 1 color. So you are allowed to actually have a deck with just 1 color, but in general, most people will play with 2 colors just so you can utilize the benefits of both. Your deck has to have a minimum of 60 cards. You can have more than that. However, when you have more than 60 cards, your deck becomes less consistent in terms of when you're drawing. It's a lot more random what kind of card you're going to get. And so you are more likely to get a card that is not the one that would help you at that time. You can either make your deck on your own, or you can buy a pre-made deck. So there are starter decks available for every set that has come out. So the first chapter has 3 different starter decks. So there's amber amethyst, so yellow purple, there's ruby emerald, which is red green, and sapphire steel, which is blue gray. For Floodborn, there's 2. There's amber sapphire, so yellow blue, and amethyst steel, which is purple gray. And then for Inklands, they have a amber emerald, which is yellow green, and a ruby sapphire, which is red blue. Each color kind of has its own characteristics, but in general, ruby, amethyst, and steel are considered offensive, like attack type colors, and then amber, emerald, and sapphire are considered more of like support ink colors. And in general, most people will pair a attack color with a support color. Once you figure out what ink colors you want, you pick 2, you make your deck. Most people will have 4 copies of each type of card in your deck. So let's say Like, so for example, this is a Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer. You can have a maximum of 4 copies of her in your deck. You could also have like a different Minnie Mouse, like Minnie Mouse Always Classy or any of the other Minnie Mouses, and you could have 4 of those. So it's not like just one character, it's just that specific card. You can have a maximum of 4. And then there are 5 different types of cards. Let's go through all of them. And you don't have to have all of these in your deck, although most will include, you have to have at least characters, probably. I suppose you could make a location only deck. I don't know if anyone's done that. But in general, most decks come with mostly characters, and then, so that is one category is characters, and then you can also have items, second category. Third/4th category would be actions. So there's also, it's like action/songs. So songs are a type of action, so maybe like 3B. And then there's locations. So I think of it as 5, but really it's like 4 with actions having a subset. So first type of card is a character card. So we'll look at these 2 examples. Let me zoom in. All right, so on the character card, this top corner tells you exactly how much ink it costs to play this character. So Minnie Mouse here costs 3, Merlin Rabbit costs 4. So you have to have at least that much ink in your inkwell to play each character. Next, you'll have their name. So this is Minnie Mouse, this one is Merlin, and then you'll have like a little description. So this is Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer. There's also like Minnie Mouse Wide-Eyed Diver, Minnie Mouse Always Classy, Minnie Mouse Zipping Around, and then there's Merlin. This one's Merlin Rabbit. So there's Merlin Rabbit, Merlin Goat, Merlin Squirrel, all different types. And so next you'll have this symbol. So it's kind of like a, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. So it's like a sun pattern, sunburst pattern. And that is their strength. You can also think of it as like their attack power. And then this shield is their willpower. So I think of it as like their defense. When one character challenges another character, so like they go into battle essentially, Minnie will deal 1 damage to whatever she's challenging. Merlin will deal 2 damage to whatever she's challenging. So in this case, if these 2 characters were to attack each other, they would both get damage, but because the damage, so Minnie would get 2 damage from Merlin, Merlin would get 1 damage from Minnie, but because that's still less than 3, they would not be banished. However, if you had a super strong character, like say you had Maui, right? So he has 6 attacks, so that is way more. So if Maui were to try to attack Merlin, Merlin would 100% be banished, and then Maui would just have 2 damage. Same thing if Maui were to attack Minnie, same thing. So, and then some characters have special effects. So these 3 all happen to have special effects. And so we'll go through them kind of as we reach them. So normally when you play a character, so let's say I'm going to play Merlin Rabbit for 4 ink, and I have 4 ink in my inkwell. So I play him. This first turn, he can't actually do anything. So he can't challenge anybody. He can't sing songs. He can't quest because his ink is still wet. So he has to wait until the next turn before he can do anything. He does, however, have like a special ability. So it says, when you play this character and when he leaves play, you may draw a card. So when you play him, so you're saying, I'm playing Merlin for 4 ink. You get to draw a card. And then the next turn he can do other stuff. That is how most characters work. However, if you have a character like Maui, he has Rush. So it says this character can challenge the turn they are played. So he can challenge when he's played. So you don't have to wait for his ink to dry. He is already ready to go. He can't, however, sing or quest the turn he's played. That part, you still have to wait for your next turn. So he can only challenge people the turn he is played. I think Ruby and Amethyst are really the 2 ink colors that have this rush ability. So that is the exception. So in general, in Lorcana, there are a lot of like general rules that happen, and those are followed unless the character card says something that contradicts it. Then you follow what the card says. Minnie here, she has a special ability, evasive. So only characters with evasive can challenge this character. So let's say you were to play Minnie and your opponent tried to play a Maui. The Maui cannot attack Minnie because she's evasive and he is not evasive. And so unless you're able to give Maui evasive somehow, then you can attack Minnie. Otherwise, Minnie is safe from him attacking, or I should say challenging. So that's character cards. One thing you can notice on the character cards for Minnie and Merlin is that Merlin just has a hexagon and Minnie has the hexagon with the swirl. So that indicates whether or not the card is inkable. So whether or not you can use this card and put it in your inkwell to turn into ink. So the cards with the little swirl are inkable, so they can become ink. The cards without the swirl cannot become ink. Of course, there are always exceptions. So if you have Fishbone, Quill, and Sapphire, that lets you ink any card, even if it's not inkable. And then there's also a card now in the new set in Emerald called Hidden Inkcaster that also lets you ink usually not inkable cards. All right, next type of card that we will talk about is an item card. So actually there are no item cards in my deck, which is Ruby Amethyst. So I will go into Brian's deck, which is Amber Steel, and find one of his flutes. So this is an example of an item card. So if you look, it's set up similarly. This is the ink cost, so it costs 2 ink to play this card. However, because it's just the hexagon without the swirl, it's not an inkable card, so you can't turn this into ink. An item, so remember how we talked about characters, like the turn you play them, they can't do anything because they have to dry? That doesn't apply for any of the other cards, just characters. So the item you can immediately use. So for example, in this one, it has this little hexagon with the arrow, and that means you exert the item. So basically you turn it sideways, and then you can use whatever it says. So it says, if you played a song this turn, gain 1 lore. And so basically, we'll kind of go over this while we go through the steps, but every turn you can use a character, you can exert a character or an item, and you do that by turning it sideways, and it's like a one-time thing each turn. And if you do that and you played a song, you get 1 lore. So items can be exerted every turn, and they can be used immediately. So those are items. And items can be inkable or not inkable. It all depends. So the next type of card is an action. Okay, so here is an example of an action card. So same thing, top corner tells you how much it costs. This one, it has a swirl, so it is inkable, so you can turn it to ink. And it'll say action right here. And then it says deal 2 damage to chosen character or location. So action items, you can play, you play it, and then it's used up. So it's like a one-time thing, and you have to pay ink for it. A type of action card is a action song. So if you look at this, it'll say action song. So it counts as an action, but it's also a song. So this one is 3 ink, and it's inkable because it's got the swirl. Friends on the other side, and it says draw 2 cards. So you can either pay the 3 ink and draw 2 cards, or alternatively, you can have a character with cost 3 or more sing this song for free. So for example, our 2 cards from before, Merlin, Rabbit, and Minnie, they both cost more than 3 ink. So they could sing this song. So if you want them to sing it, you just say like Merlin Rabbit is going to sing Friends on the Other Side. You turn him to the side because he's done a thing and he can do 1 thing a turn, and then you use it, and then that's the end. If you had a character say like Pinocchio, he costs 2 ink. And the song is 3, so he can't sing that song. He is not eligible, doesn't cost enough ink to be able to sing it. The exception to this rule, because there's obviously some exceptions, are singer characters. So an example of that would be like this Cinderella. She costs 1 ink, so technically she shouldn't be able to sing a 3 ink song. However, she has the special ability Singer 3. This character counts as cost 3 to sing songs. So she can see 3, so basically she can sing 3 cost songs, even though she's only a 1 cost character because she has this special ability. So that is songs. So songs can either be paid for by ink or they can be sung by characters. And then the last type of card is a location card. So an example for my Ruby Amethyst deck would be something like the Queen's Castle. So here, Queen's Castle. So the cards are printed long ways, but if you think of it like a character card or an action card like this number tells you how much ink it costs. So this one costs 4 ink. It's an inkable card. And then it has the shield, which is its willpower. So you need to do basically 7 damage in order to banish this card. And then it also has a number all the way on this side. So instead, it has no attack power. So if you look at the character cards, they have like the little sun thing right next to the shield, and that's their attack power. The locations don't have that. Instead, they have this like super fancy Art Deco hexagon, I would say, and that the number in there tells you how much ink it costs to move a character to this location. So let's say you had a Merlin rabbit already on the field, and then you want to play a Queen's Castle, so that'll cost you 4 ink. And then if you pay an extra ink, so a 5th ink, you can move Merlin rabbit into the castle. Now, why would you want to move Merlin rabbit into the castle? So some locations have special abilities. So it says like using the mirror. At the start of your turn, for each character you have here, you may draw a card. So if you have Merlin rabbit at the Queen's Castle and then it's your turn again and he's still there, you get to draw an extra card. Not all locations have that, so sometimes it's pointless to move characters to locations. If you notice here, it also has the lore symbols. So kind of like the ones for the characters, but basically at the start of your turn, every turn, if you have a Queen's Castle on the board, you get 2 additional lore. You don't have to quest or anything, you just automatically get it. So location cards, when you play them, they are immediately active in that they don't have to dry or anything, because they also can't attack. So that's why I think they printed them so that they're sideways, so they're always exerted. Once you play them though, they can get challenged, and whatever is challenging them doesn't get any damage. And then let's say I had a Minnie Mouse at my Queen's Castle. What if someone attacks my Queen's Castle enough with 7 strength total, and then my Queen's Castle gets banished? So what happens is the Queen's Castle gets banished, it goes into your discard, but the Minnie Mouse just becomes a broad. So she doesn't actually get banished or anything, she just becomes a broad again. So she's no longer at the location. So those are location cards. So those are the 5 types of cards that you may encounter in Lorcana. Moving on, let's talk about actual gameplay. So most people will play with a play mat. This one we got off of Etsy. It's double-sided. It has giant tink on the other side. If you buy a starter deck, it will often come with like a play mat like this, which is like a half mat almost. And it'll say like you put your deck here, your discard here, cards in play, and inkwell. And it's supposed to go kind of like on the side like that. Although I have noticed that in general, most people play like this with their deck kind of right here and their discard here, and then they'll put their ink here and then cards in play here, and then usually like a lore counter or a notebook to count the lore on this side. I'm gonna take this away. So to start the game, you would shuffle your deck and then you present your deck to your opponent, and they can either cut your deck, which means like split it in half and then put it back together. Ooh, this card is upside down. Cut it in half like that. Or they can shuffle your deck. Sometimes people will like cut it into thirds. And that really is just to prevent, like in case you were, basically to prevent cheating. In case you were somehow like moving the cards so that they were in like a specific order, by letting your opponent kind of like change the order a little bit, the goal is to prevent that. So once you have cut your opponent's deck, they've cut your deck, you get to deal 7 cards. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that is your initial starting hand. And then you look at that hand and you decide which cards you want to keep and which cards you want to discard. And I would say in general, this is a very important part of playing. And this part is called the mulligan. So deciding which cards you want to keep, which cards you want to trade. And when you think about that, some of the things to think about are how many ink does everything cost and whether or not it is inkable or not inkable. So for example, this Scar character here, this card, costs 7 ink and it's not inkable. So I can't put it in my inkwell. It's just going to stay in my hand until I can play it. And 7 ink is pretty expensive, so I'm not going to be able to play it for basically 7 turns. And so it's probably not a card I want in my hand in the very beginning. So I would probably choose that to get rid of. I might also choose to get rid of this Maui just because it's very expensive and I probably won't play it and I would rather draw it later. This rabbit, I think is a card that most people would keep in their hand, even though it's 4 ink, so it's not super expensive, and it's not inkable, so that's not great. But when you have this card, it lets you draw a card when you play it, and usually by turn 4 is a time when you would want cards, like you need more cards, so that's usually something that people would keep. And in general, most people will keep like low cost characters. Also, because if you think about it, if you have all the low cost characters low cost characters you want in the beginning, when you're later in the game, you want to be picking up all your high cost characters that have a lot of strength and a lot of willpower. And so if you keep these low cost characters in your hand now, you're less likely to draw them later, and you can just turn these into ink. And so I would say, like, I would mulligan or trade these 2 cards. So I would tell my opponent, I'm going to mulligan 2 cards. And so I would take these 2 cards out. I would deal myself 2 more cards. And then you put these 2 cards on the bottom, and then you shuffle again. You shuffle. Most people do where they do one of these things a couple times, and then you would let your opponent cut your deck again. So let's pretend my opponent did that. And then kind of neaten them, put them in the top corner, and then you are ready to start your game. So the other thing to think about if you've been playing a couple games is to make sure this is set to 0. So I tend to use a lore counter like this. It just has a spinny wheel, goes all the way up to 20. Some people will also write the lore down on like a piece of paper. And then there's like different ones you can buy on Etsy, and then the one that comes with the starter deck is like a little paper thing that goes on the numbers, and I feel like that moves a lot. Some people use like a 20-sided dice, which is what I used for a while before I got a lore counter, but I feel like I knocked that over a lot. And so you have, let's say I'm going first. I have my cards, and then I got to decide what I want to play. So I usually, first turn, you choose something to ink. So you can see here let me zoom in a little bit. If you look at my hand here, I have 3 things that cost 1 ink. So probably I'm going to ink one of those. The other thing you can think about, it depends who you're playing, right? So if you're playing somebody who plays a lot of small characters, that's very aggressive and tries to get lore really fast, maybe you want to keep all 3 of these and play 1 of them on turn 1 and 2 of them on turn 2 so you can deal with all of their characters. So it kind of depends. A lot of times you don't know what you're playing, and so probably lowest risk would be to ink one of the Olafs because you have another one. So you would say, I'm inking an Olaf. So you have to announce to your partner what you're inking, and then you turn it face down, and then nobody can look at it after that. And it usually goes on the bottom section of your playmat, and it is upright. And then you say, let's say I'm going to play a Rafiki for 1 ink, because that's what he costs, and you would turn your ink to the side to say that you've used this ink. So this is called exerting when you turn it to the side. It basically means you're using it. Some people will also call tapping because that's like what it's called in Magic. But it's basically like this ink is used, so I won't use it anymore. This becomes more important when you have like 4 or 5 ink and you want to play 2 characters. You have to make sure that you're accounting for each ink that you're spending. And then because this is a character, he doesn't have rush, so you just say, that is kind of the end of the turn. You can't do anything else. You say pass, and then your opponent goes. And then when it's your turn again, the steps are ready, set, draw. So you have to ready. So ready basically is you take everything that was sideways, you turn it back so that it's not being used. And then you make sure some cards will be like, oh, at the beginning of your turn, you can draw an extra card, or at the beginning of your turn, this happens. So you have to make sure you do all those things. And like if you have a location, you have to make sure you get the lore for your location. And then once all those things are done, you draw a card. So the first turn of every game doesn't draw a card, and then every turn after that draws a card. So let's say I'm on turn 2. So now I'm looking at my cards. They're all 3 ink, 4 ink things, right? Except for this Olaf. So that's the only thing I can play. So I can decide if I want to play this Olaf or if I just want to ink and then pass my turn. And then, so let's say I'm playing a super aggressive deck and I think this castle is probably going to be too slow in getting lore. Let's say I want to ink my castle. So I'll say I'm going to ink a queen's castle. So you show your opponent, you turn it over. So now if you look at my ink well, I have 2 cards here. So that means I have 2 cards I can spend. But I don't have anything I can spend 2 cards on. So I could play one Olaf. I'll say I play Olaf for 1, so I would turn 1 card to the side to say that I've used it. So technically I still have another ink I could spend if I had anything to spend it on, but I don't. And then Olaf is wet, so he can't do anything. He was just played. Rafiki was placed last turn, so then I can choose with Rafiki, do I want to challenge one of the opponent's characters, or do I want to quest, so to get 1 lore, or I could just leave him and do nothing. If I want to quest, I would turn him to the side, and then he would quest for 1, and then I would mark 1 on my lore counter like that. And so I'm at 1 lore. The benefit of not questing would be if he isn't exerted. So like, let's say he's just this way and I say pass, I don't quest for 1. Then my opponent can't attack either character, because you can only attack characters that are exerted. So if they're like this, my opponent can't attack them. If they're like this, my opponent can attack them. So let's just say I'm going to quest for 1 with Rafiki, and then I would say pass. It's my opponent's turn. He readies his board, he draws a card, and then he decides what he's going to do, if he's going to attack me or if he's not going to attack me. And then his turn is over, and then I go through the same process. So ready, so I turn everything back so that they're not being used, and then I check to see if I have any like early like locations or anything to get lore for, and then I draw a card. And so now I look at my cards, and then I have to decide, what do I want to ink and what do I want to play? So let's say I'm going to ink Merlin Rabbit. I say I'm going to ink Merlin Rabbit. So now I have 3 ink in my inkwell, and I say I want to play a Minnie Mouse for 3. So I play my Minnie Mouse, and I turn my cards to the side, all 3 of them, because I've used 3. And then Minnie Mouse is still wet, so she can't do anything, but my Olaf and my Rafiki can both do something. They can quest or they can attack. When you get higher up into, like, say, Minnie Mouse, because she is 3 cost, she also could potentially sing, so there aren't really any 1 cost songs, but Minnie Mouse is 3, and there are quite a few 3 cost songs. So you could say, let's say it's the next turn, so I'm on like my 4th turn. So I'm going to put this on the top, pretend I draw that. Okay, so let's say my opponent goes, all my people are still alive somehow. It's my turn. I turn everything back up facing me, and then I draw a card. I get this Friends on the Other Side. It's a song. I want Minnie to sing it so I can draw more cards. So I say, I will have Minnie sing Friends on the Other Side. So because she's doing something, I have to turn her to the side. And because she sung a song, she now can't quest, and she also can't attack, because she can only do 1 thing. Each character can really only do 1 thing per turn. So she sings Friends on the Other Side. That lets me draw 2 cards. And then this, because it's an action, it's a one-time use, it goes right here underneath my deck in my discard pile, and that is face up. And your opponent can look through your discard pile at any time. And you can look through your discard pile at any time. That is like public knowledge. So now I can say, oh, I'm going to ink this snake. So now I have 4 ink. I haven't used any. I didn't have to use 3 ink for the song because Minnie sang it. And then these 2 characters can quest or they can challenge. And then I can still play, say, like this rabbit, which costs 4 ink. I can say, I'm going to play rabbit for 4 ink. And I turn my 4 ink to the side so that you know that they're used. And then because rabbit lets you draw a card when you play them, you can draw another card. And then you choose if you want to quest or if you want to attack. So that's basically, you keep going back and forth like that until somebody reaches 20 lore or someone runs out of cards. And then at each turn, most people will ink something. So they'll put something in each turn. Most people will ink something because that is one of your resources you want to kind of keep going. And you have to decide with your characters if you want them to quest, if you want them to sing, if you want them to challenge. Those are the 3 options. If you have an item in play, you have to decide if you want to use the item or not. Some items cost ink to use, so it'll say on the card whether or not that is the case. And then every turn you don't have to ink, you don't have to quest with anybody, you can leave everybody just unexerted. It's up to you. You can choose to do nothing. So you just keep doing that until somebody gets to 20 or someone runs out of cards, and then the game is over. So the thing that makes Lorcana very interesting is that all the colors kind of have their own personality in terms of what they do. So Ruby has a lot of evasive and rush characters. Sapphire has a lot of items. Amber has all of the singers and the bodyguards and the healers, and all the cards, if they have special abilities, it'll be printed on the card. And so yeah, it's kind of finding what kind of play style you like and what you want to play. So another thing I didn't talk about on the cards is this little symbol here. So this symbol is the rarity of the card. So for example, this card, we're going to zoom in. So this card, Merlin Crab, has the circle. That means that is a common card. So if you were to open a booster pack at random, you're going to get 6 of these. Next, we have like this symbol, the 4 shield thing. That means it's an uncommon card. So in each booster pack, you get like 3 of those. Next this is a triangle that is rare. So obviously more rare than a common or uncommon. After that, we have this like 4-sided thing. That is a super rare card, so more rare than a rare card. And then the most rare card has this gold pentagon, and that is a legendary card, so very rare card. And then there's actually one type that is even more rare in Lorcana, and that is this symbol. So this hexagon with the rainbow, that is a enchanted card. And so that is usually, I will zoom out on this one, that is usually a holographic card. These cards usually don't get played in decks because they're worth a lot of money. So this one is Belle. And I will eventually do a video kind of showcasing all our enchanteds. I feel like I have pretty good luck when I'm opening cards, and so we've gotten a bunch of them. But these cards are usually worth like a couple $100, or in the case of Elsa, like over $1,000. And so they usually don't get played. And if you see, ours is in this like hard plastic case, just so that it stays protected and in best condition possible. So that's it on how to play. Set 4 does have Sing Together, which is a new mechanic where multiple characters can sing a song like as a group. And if you want to know some common TCG terms, check out that video. I have a video about that because that was very confusing for me in the beginning. I also have a video about all the ink color personalities and how I think they're like Hogwarts houses. Yeah, so that's that. And as always, keep shuffling, and hopefully you don't end up with a whole handful of non-inkable cards like me. All right, bye.